In this video, we learn local properties and data binding. Let's go to our VS Code and try to understand first the properties and then the local properties. So now we'll go to our hello world.js, the component that we created, and we already know each component is a class. In our case, the hello world is our class. So the class, it contains usually two things, the properties and the methods. And to a layman, the properties are the fields, or you can say a variable that store the data in layman term. Okay, so if I create some field here, name, so this is a property. Okay, then you can create an age, this is a property, and you can initialize this property with the value using equal to. Right, so these are the properties, and these properties are only available inside this particular class. That's why we call them as a local property. You can't access these variable outside this class. So these are the local properties. So let's try to understand what all types of property you can create. You can create a normal property without initializing anything, so by default this will be undefined. You can create the property with a number. You can create the property with a name. I'll create a property full name and I'll say Salesforce India or anything. And then you can create, we created a number, we created a string, you can create the boolean. Show data is my property name and I can initialize it as false or true. This is a boolean. And many people ask, do we need to enter the semicolon? It's not required, but if you want and you like to add that, you can add that. Okay, so in JavaScript it doesn't matter. Then we can create an objects as well. So if I create a property details, and detail can have many things. Detail can have name, dummy, then place, Melbourne. So this is an object format, right? And I can create array as well, user list. I have a user A, I have a user B, I have a user C. Likewise, you can create any type of data and assign it to a property. So there is no limitation on creating this. So this is the property and these are the local properties right now. So now the second topic of our this video is the data binding. So till now we have seen how to create the properties and how to initialize the value to the properties and what all different types of values you can assign. So let's go to our slide and try to understand first data binding. So data binding in the Lightning Web Component is the synchronization between the controller and the template. So template here is our HTML and the controller is our JavaScript. So if I create a property full name and I'll assign a value. Now if I want this data that I have assigned to my local property, that is full name, to show on the screen, that is HTML, right? So I have to use these flower brackets or the curly bracket and I have to bind that property. So whatever the value assigned to the property will be visible on the screen. So this is called data binding, the synchronization between the controller and the template, and it's a one-way data binding. So data is flowing from JS to HTML, and these are the expression bracket. We call these brackets are expression bracket. So in HTML, whenever we want to bring something from JavaScript, we use these brackets. So let's go and see this in a demo. So now I'm in my JS. I'll remove all the properties that I have created and create a new property, and I'll create a new property called full name, and I'll initialize this value as 020, and I'll go to the HTML, and if I want to bind this data to an HTML, we need to use this flower bracket, and I'll call this property name as it is in between those flower bracket. So now automatically LWC is intelligent enough, it do the binding behind the scene. It takes the JavaScript variable and bind it with the HTML, and here it will print 0 to hero on the screen. Let's go and deploy this. And now you guys already know how to deploy. To deploy, you again need to write the same command, sfdx force source colon push, and hit enter. So now the component is deployed. Let's go to our page and see whether it's printing the right data or not. Earlier the hello world was hard coded in the HTML. Now we are bringing the data from JS to an HTML using the data binding. And now you can see that 0 to hero is printing on the screen. So this is how data binding works, and this is how we create the properties, and these properties are the local properties. We'll talk more about the global properties or the public properties later on. So few things are very important to keep in mind while using the data binding. So in template we can access property value directly if it is primitive or object. So primitive or object means like primitives are the boolean value, string value, number values, and objects you already know, but you can't directly bring the values of an object. Okay, it will throw an error. So if I have a property, I'll go back to my VS Code and I will say I have a users, and I have user A, user B, and I want to bind this data. Like you already know from our JavaScript lecture, like array works with the index 0 1. So if I want the first value of an array, I can't bind like this on the screen. Users of 0, it's not allowed in LWC. Okay, only, but for object you can do that. For if I create an object and I'll initialize it with the name Nikhil, and I'll want to use this, I can use the dot notation, obj.name. So this is a valid syntax. That's why it says you can either use a primitive, that is a direct value like string, number, or boolean, or the objects, but you can't use the arrays. This thing you need to remember. And to use the object, dot notation is being used to access the property. Just now I showed you. And LWC doesn't allow computed expression like name 2 and 2 plus 2. Yes, that's what I showed you earlier. So suppose you have 2 plus 2, it's not allowed, and we'll talk about this in the upcoming videos. And in upcoming videos I'll show you how you can achieve these scenarios in other ways. And then the properties in the flower bracket must be a valid JavaScript identifier or a member expression, like I showed you, name and user.name. And always try to give the space around the properties. Sometimes it behaves weird, so always try to write your data without any spaces. That's just a suggestion. You can write it, but sometimes it behaves weird. So these things are you need to remember when you are creating the properties and binding the properties. So in next video we'll learn how to achieve the two-way data binding. Right now we have seen controller to HTML. In next video we'll see from HTML to controller as well. I'll see you in the next video.